You're tuning into the deep dive because you're looking to absorb knowledge efficiently and thoroughly. And that's precisely what we're about. Forget endless scrolling. We extract the core insights for you.
Exactly. Today, we're diving deep into the world of the samurai sword. We're looking at Naked Blade, a manual of samurai swordsmanship by Toshishiro Obata.
Right, and this isn't just about swords hanging on a wall, is it? We've got Obata Sensei's manual on Battojutsu. That's the art of drawing and cutting almost instantly.
And we're also looking at the history, the practical side of these weapons, and the whole philosophy behind it.
So our mission today really is to understand the principles, the history of this martial art, see how it's different from, say, modern sports fencing, and really appreciate the thinking behind it all.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's get straight to it. What is Battojutsu, fundamentally?
Well, think of Battojutsu as the original core skill. Imagine a samurai facing a sudden threat. Battojutsu is that ability to whip out the saber and, well, deal with the aggressor in one smooth, continuous motion. Immediate. Decisive.
So not those long, drawn-out movie sword fights, then?
No, not really. It's very different from modern kendo, which is, much more of a sport now.
Right.
And it's also distinct from Iaido, which often focuses more on the sort of artistic form of the draw itself.
Oh, okay.
For the feudal samurai, Battojutsu wasn't a hobby. It was absolutely central to their job, their service to their lord.
It was part of who they were.
Absolutely. For well over 1,000 years, the samurai and their martial skill, they basically were the law in Japan. Swordmaster was key to their authority, their place in society.
That really changes the perspective. Now, the book talks about Toyama-ryu Battojutsu being particularly effective, Spartan even.
Yes, its efficiency is really striking. Toyama-ryu is known for being very direct. It just cuts out all the unnecessary sort of artificial movements or poses.
Purely functional.
Purely functional. It's about getting the maximum result, which often meant, a fatal cut with the absolute minimum wasted effort, especially in self-defense.
Sounds incredibly pragmatic.
Totally. And the cutting power? It's potentially devastating. Obata Sensei notes that a skilled master could even cut through things like, well, iron or steel.
Wow, okay, that sounds almost legendary.
It does, but it comes down to a very precise mix of things. Perfect technique, obviously power, but also, critically, the right angle of the blade hitting the target. That's called hasuji.
Hasuji. Like the edge alignment.
Exactly. Think about slicing bread, right? If you hold the knife wrong, it tears.
It doesn't cut clean.
Hasuji is making sure that blade meets the target perfectly for a clean, deep cut, and that's not something you just pick up from a book. It traditionally requires serious training in a proper school that's kept these old, battle-tested methods alive.
Which naturally leads us to the weapon itself. The Japanese sword, we often see it as this beautiful art object, right? An objet d'art, as the book says. Was that the main view for the people using them?
Not really, no, and that's a really important difference. Sure, there are stunning art swords made for collectors, absolutely beautiful. But for the serious swordsman, the person actually training, the priority is a sword made for use. It's a tool first, a weapon.
So function really comes before form for them.
Very much so. Yasuhiro Kobayashi, a modern smith mentioned in the book, he really stresses this. He focuses on forging swords like they did back in the Kodo period. That's roughly 950 to 1530.
Wow, old school.
Yeah, he tries to blend that beauty with real strength and sharpness. But he insists, absolutely insists, that a sword's cutting ability is the real test of its value.
He compares it to a violin, doesn't he? That was interesting.
He does. Just like a great violin needs to sound amazing, not just look good. Kobayashi says a sword has to cut well. That's its primary job.
And he tests them pretty intensely, right?
Oh, yeah. He apparently puts his blades through some brutal tests, cutting steel cables, big nails, even iron helmets, things like that.
Seriously, that seems extreme, almost disrespectful to the art form, some might say.
Well, maybe to some collectors who see them purely as historical artifacts, yeah, it might seem sacrilegious.
I could see that.
But for the martial artist, the person who actually needs to understand how a sword works, it's fantastic. It's proof from the maker that this thing is strong and it cuts like it's supposed to.
Right, it anchors that romantic image in some very sharp reality. Okay, let's talk about the lineage of Toyama-ryu. The author, Toshishiro Obata, he's presented as a modern master. What's his story?
Obata Sensei has a really deep background in martial arts. Started young, his father knew bayonet fighting and Maniwa Nenryu.
Which is?
Oh, it's a comprehensive system. Weapons, grappling, the works. Then Obata Sensei went on to train really seriously in lots of different arts. Aikido with Goso Shiota, who's legendary,
Okay.
and also Yagi Ryu, Yorkin Ryu, Kashima Shinryu, even ninjutsu under Yumi Onawa, a top expert.
Wow, that's quite the resume. A broad foundation.
Definitely. But a really key moment for him was seeing a demonstration by Nakamura Taizaburo. Nakamura was a senior instructor in Toyama Ryu and founded his own style, Nakamura Ryu.
And what was so impressive about that demo?
Obata-sensei said he was just blown away by the raw power and the directness of Nakamura's technique. He felt other styles he'd seen looked slow, maybe less realistic in comparison.
Huh.
He saw Nakamura-sensei just cleanly cut through thick targets. No wasted movement, no theatrics, just pure effective cutting.
That must have really resonated with him.
It clearly did. He jumped right into training, became a dedicated student, and got really good really fast in both Toyama Ryu and Nakamura Ryu.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't stop there. He also studied other traditional samurai skills like horsemanship, archery,
Aye.
trying to get that full warrior training. He even became a champion multiple times in tamashigiri test cutting for both Yoriken and Toyama Ryu.
So he really walked the walk. He could actually use the blade effectively.
Absolutely. Practical skill was clearly important. He also did work coordinating samurai arts for movies and TV, trying to keep it authentic.
Interesting.
Later, he set up his own martial arts organization over in the US and kept studying and teaching. And this book, Naked Blade, is significant because it's apparently the first big work in English just on Toyama Ryu Battojutsu, and it's described as the sword art of the Imperial Army.
The Imperial Army. That's interesting. Because you often think that real swordsmanship kind of died out with the samurai class after the Meiji Restoration.
Yeah, it's a pretty common idea. And it's
Yeah.
true, the Meiji Restoration, late 19th century, banned samurai from wearing swords in public. That basically ended their traditional role.
Right.
But it didn't kill practical swordsmanship. A really key place for preserving it was the Toyama Gakko. It was established back in 1875 under the new government.
Oyamagaka, what was that?
It was a military school set up to train personnel in various skills, and swordsmanship was seen as really important, especially for officers.
Oh, for the military.
Exactly. And crucially, they didn't just teach old, maybe outdated stuff. They brought in living masters, real experts, to teach the most effective combat techniques. All practiced from a standing position, which made sense for the military.
Practical.
Very. And this mixing of effective techniques from older schools, Omori Ryu was a key influence within the Army's training structure that eventually led to the formal Toyama School of Swordsmanship being founded in 1925.
So in a way, as the samurai class faded, the military became the new keepers of practical sword skills.
That's a good way to put it. At the same time, other sword schools, well, they had different pressures. Their traditional patrons, the samurai, were gone.
So they needed new students.
Right. Many had to appeal to the general public to survive. And to do that, they often started teaching maybe easier, less demanding forms of swordplay. That's really where Kenjutsu, the traditional samurai sword arts, started morphing into Kendo, the sport we know today.
Okay, so it sounds like a bit of a trade-off. Make it more accessible, but maybe lose some of the hardcore combat elements.
I think that's fair. Kendo's focus shifted more towards fitness competition, which are valuable, sure. But the book argues that this led to simplifying techniques and losing some genuine practical aspects of swordsmanship, like the bamboo practice sword, the shinai, great for safety and sparring.
Sure.
But it doesn't really let you learn how to execute a proper cutting-edge leading slice. The mechanics are just different.
The book quotes someone, Douglas Sladen, back in 1904, describing fencing then as almost like theatrical.
Yeah, that's a great quote. He talks about people battering each other with lots of theatrical attitudes. He even mentions grappling and mask ripping when temper is flared.
Definitely not focused on a clean kill.
No, it really shows how far it had moved from lethal battlefield skills. The book compares it to how jiu-jitsu evolved into judo, becoming more of a sport, maybe diluting some of the original fight-ending techniques for wider appeal.
So while kendo and judo became popular sports, Kenjutsu, the more traditional combat-focused version, it found a refuge elsewhere.
Exactly. Kenjutsu, with its focus on practical application, really survived and thrived in the Spartan environment of military academies like the Rikugun Toyama Gakko.
Within the military structure.
Yes. There, the actual techniques and maybe even the warrior spirit of the samurai were deliberately kept alive in a very functional way.
The book mentions Japan's military masters from 1943. What does that tell us about the training?
That source highlights just how intense the physical training was at the Toyama school. It wasn't just bayonet fighting and Japanese fencing, which was basically Kenjutsu,
Right.
but also a huge emphasis on endurance, specialized skills. Officers were expected to be incredibly tough, very capable. There's even a wild story about graduates using rifle fire to set off British mines in Hong Kong harbor.
Wow. Shows incredible skill beyond just swords.
Definitely shows a high level of overall training. But what about proof of the sword techniques themselves being effective in combat?
Good question. Is there evidence?
Well, the book offers something pretty stark. A U.S. Army publication from '43 called The Jap Soldier.
Okay, wartime intelligence.
Exactly, meant for American officers. It specifically warns them that Japanese officers often still use the old-fashioned sword. And it states very directly, these swords can slice a man from collarbone to waist in a single clean slash.
Oof. That's blunt.
Mm-hmm.
And chilling.
It really is. It suggests a very real respect, maybe even fear, based on actual combat encounters.
Makes sense.
The book also talks about the Nanpo Kirakomitai, the Southern Special Attack Force in Manchuria during the war. This was an elite group armed only with swords.
Only swords.
Yep.
Against modern infantry.
Yeah, and incredibly, they apparently inflicted serious casualties on enemy troops who had firearms.
How on earth did they manage that?
Tactics. It was all about closing the distance, fast, get inside the effective range of the rifles.
Okay.
Once they were close, maybe inside 90 feet, one instructor apparently said small arms fire becomes much less accurate, especially under pressure, and that's when the swordsman's superior close combat skill becomes overwhelming.
Speed and shock value.
Exactly. The sheer speed, the skill, the psychological impact of these guys charging with swords. It apparently caused enemy soldiers to hesitate, break ranks, letting the attackers close that final gap.
Yeah. A powerful reminder that technology isn't everything. Now, Nakamura Taizaburo, the master who impressed Obata, he had some strong opinions about kendo versus real swordsmanship.
Oh, definitely. Master Nakamura felt very strongly that kendo, because it focused so much on showmanship and competition, couldn't really be considered serious martial training. Not until they got rid of those aspects and brought back tamashigiri, test cutting.
He thought test cutting was essential.
Absolutely essential. He believed that without actually cutting something real, a student could never truly understand how the sword is meant to be used, how to really refine their technique. Practical application was everything to him.
So maybe the fact that Toyama Ryu wasn't as well known outside the military actually helped it stay, well, authentic.
That's exactly the point the book makes. Because it stayed mostly within military circles, it wasn't subject to the same pressures after World War II from the U.S. occupation forces.
Ah, the push to turn martial arts into sports.
Right. The U.S. authorities wanted to reshape what they saw as potentially dangerous or nationalistic martial arts into more acceptable, sportive forms. Toyama Ryu kind of flew under the radar.
So it kept its practical edge.
It did. It remained this practical, effective martial art for people genuinely interested in the way of the samurai, focusing on combat effectiveness, efficiency, and maybe a kind of dignified ruthlessness needed for survival.
We've talked a lot about the how of swordsmanship, but the Japanese sword itself, it has huge cultural weight, doesn't it?
Oh, immense.
Right.
It's hard to overstate its significance in Japanese culture. It's one of the 3 imperial regalia, the symbols that legitimize the emperor's rule.
Wow, okay, so it's tied to the very idea of sovereignty.
Yes. It symbolizes courage, power, deeply revered qualities. And historically, a really fine sword was also a top-tier religious offering. It represented rarity, value, and the power to destroy evil.
So much more than just a weapon.
Way more. For samurai families, a great sword was a priceless heirloom, passed down generation after generation with immense pride. Think of famous swords like the Kogarasu Maru or the Amano-Morokumo no Tsurugi. They're literally national treasures.
And there's folklore too, right? Like the Muramasa blade.
Oh yeah, tons of folklore.
Yeah.
The Muramasa blades were famous for being incredibly sharp, almost supernaturally so. They got this reputation for being bloodthirsty, and the Tokugawa shoguns actually feared them because of some bad luck associated with them.
Really?
Yeah, and then other blades were thought to bring good fortune. So yeah, the sword is woven into history, legend, spirituality, everything.
Amazing. Now, the sword itself didn't always look like the classic katana, did it? Its form evolved.
Right, quite dramatically. If you go way back to the Jokodo period, before about 800 AD, the swords were generally straight, sometimes single-edged, sometimes double-edged.
Straight, like European swords.
Sort of, yeah. And the quality wasn't always consistent, especially the tempering. There wasn't really a standard design. They were mostly for thrusting and often just hung from the waist with cords. It's thought many were made by Chinese or Korean smiths working in Japan back then.
So when did the curve come in?
The big change started around the 8th century AD, often credited to the legendary smith Amakuni. The adoption of that curved cutting edge was a huge technological leap. Combine that with better tempering, and you get the golden age of sword making, roughly between 1394 and 1427. Initially, the main sword was the tachi, longer, heavier, worn edge down.
Why edge down?
Because it was mainly used by mounted warriors. They'd draw it upwards, but then warfare changed. More massed infantry battles.
Close quarters.
Exactly. So the shorter, lighter katana became more popular, worn edge up, thrust through the sash, much quicker to draw and cut in tight spaces.
And just changing how you wear it led to a whole new fighting style.
It was revolutionary. That seemingly small change, wearing it edge up, directly led to the development of Battojutsu, the art of drawing and cutting in one fluid motion. It became a distinct discipline alongside Kenjutsu, which is fighting with an already drawn sword. Schools specifically dedicated to Battojutsu popped up.
Fascinating how form follows function, and function creates new forms. Then came the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring Provinces period. Constant fighting. How did that affect sword making?
Huge impact. The demand for weapons just exploded. To keep up, smiths had to start mass-producing swords.
Uh-oh. Quality probably suffered.
Big time. Quality often took a backseat to quantity. Smiths started using steel bought from suppliers, not meticulously making their own. They used faster forging methods, which meant less careful work.
Cutting corners.
Pretty much. The ideal of the smith, carefully controlling every step, using their own steel, that faded. These mass-produced swords might have looked okay, maybe even beautiful on the surface.
But underneath?
Often not great. The book calls it a pretty face hiding a worthless heart. They often lack the real strength and sharpness of the older blades. Plus, adopting some Western forging techniques that sped up production probably didn't help quality either.
Then things calmed down with the Tokugawa shogunate. Right. Centuries of peace. Did quality bounce back then?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But ironically, no, not really. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 basically ended the major wars.
Right.
And the swords that had been churned out quickly just before that battle, they kind of became the accepted standard for the next couple of centuries.
Huh. Why?
Well, with peace, there just weren't many chances to test a sword in real combat. How could you tell if it was actually good? The main way left was testing them on the bodies of executed criminals.
Grim. A pretty limited test, too.
Very limited. And Yasuhiro Kobayashi, the smith we mentioned, he's really critical of a specific construction method that became common around then.
What method was that?
It involved wrapping a hard steel jacket around a softer metal core. Easier to make, probably looked okay. Kobayashi calls it an abomination.
Strong words.
Yeah. He argues it only survived because swords became more ornamental during the long peace, and people lost the practical knowledge of what made a truly good, functional blade. Plus, the apprenticeship system kept forging methods secret, so bad practices could just keep getting passed down.
So you could have a sword that looked the part but wouldn't actually hold up.
Exactly. Kobayashi's view is that true beauty in a sword starts with sharpness and strength. Then comes appearance. A sword that chips easily or shows a soft core when you sharpen it. He says that doesn't deserve the reputation of a real, traditionally made Nippon-to.
He really emphasizes those traditional forging methods. What's so special about them, in his view?
He explains it's largely about temperature control. Heating steel too high, say above 1500 Celsius, makes it easier to hammer out, but it makes proper tempering really hard, and it lets impurities mix into the steel, which weakens it. Traditional methods used finer steel, kotetsu, and kept the forging temperatures lower max around 1350 Celsius. This prevented those impurities from messing things up. Kobayashi even did research showing older blades, like Muramasa's, are purer than a lot of modern steel.
Interesting.
So he firmly believes recreating those amazing old swords requires super careful material selection, low temperature forging, and just incredible skill and patience from the smith.
And this all ties back to Tameshigiri, the test cutting, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Kobayashi makes the point that today it's really only the Toyama, Yorikin, and Nakamura schools that still seriously practice Tameshigiri.
So they know how a sword should perform.
They get that practical feedback. Exponents from these schools have apparently cut through some seriously tough stuff, sheet steel nails, helmets using Kobayashi's blades. It proves the swords work and the techniques work. His conclusion is clear. Practical testing is the only way to really know if a sword is any good. And forging them the old way is vital to keep the true art alive.
It's a whole ecosystem, really. Okay, let's get back into the manual, Naked Blade. It talks about the basics, starting with the grip, tenuchi. Why is the grip so fundamental?
Well, as the book puts it, even the best technique is useless with a weak grip. Simple as that.
Makes sense.
If your hold isn't right, the blade can get knocked aside, maybe even break under the force of impact. Tenuchi means within the hands. It's about focusing all your power through your hands.
How should you hold it?
The book says left hand firm on the hilt, right hand just behind the guard, about 2 fingers width apart. But the key thing is this strong twisting motion during the cut, like you're wringing out a wet towel.
Wringing a towel.
Yeah, that specific wrist action. It's crucial for keeping a solid grip and maintaining the correct blade angle, that hasuji we talked about. Without that twist, the cut won't be effective.
It's so much detail in just the grip. Okay, next up, kamae, the stances. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. Kamae are the basic postures. They give you a stable base for attacking or defending. The manual covers the main ones.
Yeah.
Shurengame. Mid-level, balanced, sword tip pointing at the opponent's center. Gerengame. Lower stance, sword pointing down. Wakigame. Sword held hidden at your side, right or left.
Hiding the blade.
Exactly. Hasogame. High guard, ready to strike. And Jorengame. Upper stance, sword held overhead, again, right or left versions.
So different postures for different situations or intentions.
Right. And the book explains the weight balance, where the sword is in each one. It even includes exercises for flowing between stances. It's not about holding a static pose, it's about being ready to move.
Dynamic. Okay, that leads into cutting techniques. Toyama Ryu is all about being effective, right? How does that apply here?
It means being able to cut effectively in any situation, from any stance, with whatever technique fits the moment. It's not about perfecting one ideal cut in practice.
Adaptability.
Huge adaptability. You need the strength, the skill for each cut, understanding hasuji, a solid stance, and intense mental focus right at the moment of impact.
Sounds demanding.
It is. The book says long-term training brings benefits beyond fighting skill, though better health, energy, calmness, personal satisfaction.
Yeah.
Then it details the basic cuts. Kesagiri, that's the downward diagonal cut. Kiri-age, upward diagonal. Yokogiri, horizontal. And Tsuki, the thrust. Each has its place.
Each tool for a specific job. Now, Battojutsu. Drawing and cutting. This feels like the heart of the manual.
It really is central to the style. The core idea is that simultaneous draw and cut. One fluid motion to instantly deal with the threat. The manual is very clear, though.
What?
New students should train for at least a year with a blunt practice sword and Iaido. Safety first. Get the movements down before using a live blade.
Good advice.
Absolutely critical. And another key point. The cut only starts after the blade is completely out of the scabbard, the saya. Nicking yourself on the draw is bad form.
Yeah.
And dangerous.
Understatement.
Right. The book contrasts the strong, committed cut in Battojutsu with what it calls a sometimes feeble slice forward in modern Iaido. The goal here is immediate incapacitation.
Decisive action.
Totally. The philosophy is, first cut wounds or kills. If needed, a quick follow-up, a coup de grace. Then clean the blade, resheath it. No drama, no posing.
Very businesslike.
Exactly. The book even mentions how samurai used to judge opponents by looking at the mouth of their scabbard, the koiguchi. Lots of nicks meant sloppy technique.
Wow, a subtle sign of skill or lack thereof. Okay, after the cut comes cleaning and sheathing. Jiburi and noto.
Right. Jiburi is that sharp flick of the wrist, snapping the sword down to sling off any blood or debris. Practical cleaning.
Makes sense.
But it also introduces zanshin. That means remaining mind or awareness. Even after you've won, you stay completely alert, aware of your surroundings. The fight isn't truly over until you're safe.
Constant vigilance.
And noto is resheathing. It's done carefully, deliberately. You guide the back of the blade along your hand or the scabbard to find the opening, then slide it in smoothly without cutting the saya or yourself. Control, even at the end.
Safety and awareness right to the very end. Okay, next, the manual covers the 8 basics. Happogiri. What are these?
Happogiri, the 8 basic cuts. Think of them like the fundamental brushstrokes in calligraphy. They're the building blocks.
The absolute foundation.
Yes. They're all done from the Chudengame stance. It includes a forward thrust, horizontal cuts right and left, a rising diagonal left, the Kisagiri downward diagonals right and left, an upward kiri-age right, and a straight downward cut.
Seems straightforward enough.
They look simple, yeah. But the book says these 8 moves contain basically infinite combinations of sword paths. Mastering them gives you the foundation for everything else, like learning the alphabet before you write words.
Got it. Mastering the basics unlocks complexity. Then we have kata, the prearranged forms. How do these fit in?
Kata are the way you learn fluency and correct form, but crucially in Toyama-ryu, these katas supposedly come directly from battlefield experience. They're not abstract drills.
So they simulate real combat.
That's the idea. They're dynamic, done at full power eventually, with swift, deliberate moves, not a dance. The goal is simulating the intensity of a real fight.
How do you learn them?
Start slow. Really focus on getting the form exactly right. No bad habits. Then, as you get better, you gradually add speed and power. The book describes the first 7 kata, outlining the scenarios, maybe one attacker, maybe multiple, from different directions, and the main techniques you use in each one.
Learning responses to different threats. Now, there is a kata 8 hapame that's described differently.
Yeah, Happen Me isn't really a combat kata like the others. It's more of a formal way to test the sword's cutting power on a target, usually a rolled straw mat called a makiwara.
Test cutting again.
Exactly. The book notes it could also maybe be used to dispatch a badly wounded opponent. The movement involves drawing, getting ready, circling the blade, then a powerful downward cut from Jodengame, bending the knees to add force.
A test of power and technique. Which brings us finally to tameshigiri, test cutting itself. We've touched on it, but what's its deeper significance?
Well, historically, it was vital. Testing swords, testing swordsmen, especially in wartime. During the long Tokugawa peace, actual combat testing vanished, but some clans kept tameshigiri alive to preserve those battlefield skills. They used targets simulating bodies, sometimes grimly, actual executed criminals.
It's a rigorous process, it sounds like.
Often, yes. Done by experts, results recorded. You couldn't just hack away. Poor technique meant a failed cut, maybe even a damaged blade. It forced you to be precise.
So it's the ultimate practical feedback.
Exactly. Tameshigiri lets the swordsman truly understand the physical forces involved, the importance of hasuji, the mental focus needed. It connects the theory to reality. The book sums it up perfectly with a quote from Miyamoto Musashi.
The legendary swordsman.
Yeah, he said something like, "Swordsmanship is the craft of defeating the enemy in a fight, nothing else."
Wow. Direct, pragmatic. That really sums up the feeling of Battojutsu, doesn't it? So wrapping this up, it's clear Battojutsu is way more than just swordplay.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen it's this practical, historically deep martial art tied to the samurai, preserved by the military like the Toyama Gakko, and the sword itself. It's this powerful symbol, but also a tool where function, how well it cuts, is paramount. That's reflected in how it's made and how it's tested.
And the Toyama Ryu training, based on Obata's manual, it really emphasizes that efficiency, effectiveness, and understanding the weapon and yourself.
It's a whole integrated system.
It really has been a fascinating look into this tradition, this dedication to keeping effective combat skills alive. And it makes you think.
It does. Maybe a final thought for our listeners. When you see this historical approach to mastering something complex where technique and practical application are so tightly linked, how could you maybe apply that idea to your own learning, your own interests?
What would be your test cut?
Exactly. What's your equivalent of tameshigiri to really know if you've mastered something?
That's a great question to ponder. If this deep dive got you curious, definitely explore more about the samurai, Japanese swordsmithing, or traditional martial arts. There's a whole world there. Until our next exploration, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.